Deep beneath the known chambers of the Great Pyramids lies an ancient secret, a place where no one has visited for thousands of years, and a possible gateway to the underworld. In 1817, British Consul General of Egypt Henry Salt and his Italian counterpart Giovanni Caviglia embarked on an expedition beneath the Giza Plateau. Salt was an avid adventurer and explorer, but the mystery of Egyptian archaeology was what drove him beneath the sands, looking for what others believed to be myth. Gold, jewels, the treasures of a forgotten pharaoh were the focus of these explorers. As Salt and Caviglia descended into the catacombs, they sensed they were onto something much larger than they anticipated. Salt struck a match and lit his second torchlight as the two advanced cautiously, moving forward through a tunnel several hundred yards in length. After traveling a sizable distance, they came across 3 large chambers, equal in size and each seemingly interconnected with the other, and with even more tunnels descending further into the darkness of the underworld. Salt and Caviglia would travel no further, finding no riches, the air getting thin as they reluctantly returned to the surface. Much is left to be discovered beneath the sands of the Giza Plateau, and perhaps it is something far older than the structures left on the surface by the earliest dynasties of Egypt. The depths of the plateau have yet to reveal their true secrets. Join us on Into the Portal as we take a journey into the depths of the Egyptian underworld in search of the origins to an ancient subterranean mystery.
Hello, and welcome back into the portal. I'm Amber Ray.
And I'm Andrew McKay.
And we're coming back at you with another desert episode.
It seems that way.
Just keeps sucking us back in, man. There's something about this place. It's just,
back to Egypt again.
mysteries are pervasive there.
They're endless, really. I mean, there's something about it that always draws us back. There's, infinite mystery when it comes to Egyptology and basically anything North Africa, really, just because of the cradle of civilization, obviously, and one of the air quote oldest civilizations on Earth. And I air quote that because we're getting into some interesting themes for this episode that we'll touch on that.
So the main theme, I guess, would revolve around this discovery in recent years. So basically what the gist I got was that something resembling a real version of the underworld exists in Egypt.
Yes.
And yeah, this is something that has only come about in the last 200 years. It hasn't even been fully excavated, so we're going to get into the details of that, but also we have some other theme questions as well that we kind of want to cover in this.
Yeah, because this whole idea of there being the sort of the metaphorical underworld, and then obviously, like you said, we're going to get into the discovery of potentially a real physical manifestation of that, the tomb of Osiris. But it brought up lots of other questions too about other things that could be undiscovered underneath the Giza complex and other locations in that area of Egypt, and basically the idea that we're called into the portal, so I'm always searching for portals. The idea that perhaps the underworld was more of a real place. Maybe there's tunnels that actually lead somewhere. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Maybe they're all connected somehow.
Right.
Because I feel like we have a vague understanding of the morphology of the pyramids, but we are going to get into some more recent discoveries, I guess. They haven't even really it's mostly due to modern technology.
Yeah, they're still sort of unfolding, like, as we speak.
Yes.
But...
So I would say there's a lot left to be uncovered here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, and let's just get into it then. Because we're going to end up coming back to lots of these questions anyway. So I say we just jump right in.
Definitely.
I think it's important to start with, obviously, because we're dealing with the underworld. Man, I just love saying that too. Like, the underworld. So I think it's obviously important to kind of give some context to that. The idea of the underworld in Egyptian mythology and what it meant to the lives of the ancient Egyptians in the earliest dynasties.
Definitely. Yeah, so I actually did a little bit of research into that part. And so the basic understanding in ancient Egypt, they conceived of the underworld as sort of a journey, and it's called something called the Duat. It's D-U-A-T.
Okay.
And it's basically, yeah, like I said, like it's a journey of the soul, which is the Ka.
Right.
And the Egyptians have a very intricate understanding of the preservation needed to actually secure this journey to what is actually the Tuat. So that would be the actual
transition.
Final. Well, no, the transition area is the Duat.
Okay.
That's it's almost like I picture it as like a 90s video game where you're going from room to room, boss to boss, and you have different challenges along the way.
I see. Okay.
And then eventually, if you overcome all these challenges, you reach the Duat, which would be...
see.
Anyways, yeah, so it's really cool. This Duat is conceived of as, exactly like I said, a journey. It's filled with things like carnivorous animals, lakes of fire, spells, helpful and harmful deities, all sorts of things. And like I was referring to, it's the Ka, the soul, that journeys through this, but there's also the physical, the Ba, which is essentially the shell of the soul, the body, which is why they would go to these elaborate lengths to embalm and preserve the body.
Right.
Because it was like you needed the balance, and then once you reach the end of the journey, you're basically, but I don't even know, they refer to it as like your heart is weighed, and if you are in balance, like your Ka and your Ba, then you're... Then you can... Then you're like...
transfer over or whatever.
Totally, yeah, you kind of like, the gates are opened up or something.
Interesting.
So
we kind of like, when you brought this up when we were just discussing the notes too, like that was interesting because like, doesn't that just sound so familiar, right? Like, the archetypal hero's journey,
Definitely.
Crossing lakes of fire and having helpful and harmful. It made me think of like Hercules, like the cartoon movie when I was a kid, right, or something. Oh, like that.
Yeah, definitely. And it's so cool too because, okay, so digging into this a little bit further, the ancient Egyptians kind of conceived of the world as a disc. So it's almost like, it's not like, it was kind of thought of as like a flat earth kind of a thing. So like a round disc that's essentially surrounded by oceans, and there's this realm, but then there's the flip side of that. It's almost like the upside down, or the, you know what I mean? Like, well, that's
for all the Stranger Things fans out there.
The upside down, or the underworld.
Right.
And that was, it was basically represented as the reverse side of the world, filled with primordial waters of noon running through it, thought to be the remnants of a state of chaos before creation.
Interesting.
So very dark, very ominous. Like, this is not really like, it's not like a heaven like we think of in the clouds or something.
No.
But...
Well, that came up like in the Zerzura episodes too, just like how Egyptian religion and mythology is quite dark. Like, their whole perception of death is like, they take it very seriously. They took it very seriously, obviously. But it was much more serious than like other ancient peoples who had like some of them had much more kind of loose, you know, fun, freeing kind of takes on death, where it wasn't so ominous and dark and having to preserve everything. Like, obviously they had a very interesting mind-body dualism kind of perspective going on, right? Where you have to preserve these organs because it is essential to maintain the balance with the soul and the mind and these metaphysical things.
Very,
kind of
very
interesting.
Cool. And it's interesting too because, like you said, like, yeah, like a dualism, but it wasn't so binary. Like, it's so complicated. Like, oh my gosh, I need to become an Egyptologist to actually fully comprehend the entire thing.
Yeah.
But the gist that I got was that there's a lot of different realms that the Egyptians considered to be real, and they were interconnected, and they had blurred boundaries. So it wasn't just a matter of dying and then going to heaven or hell. There was like all these like intricate little like like I was saying before, like the analogy of like your, like, the classic 90s video games where you're like, like your Sega Genesis or your original Nintendo.
Sure.
And you're going through like the different rooms of the bosses, and there's side rooms you can go into, and maybe you'll take a shortcut, or maybe it's a long cut.
Right,
You have to
okay.
go through different challenges, but you're
Yeah.
going to end up at the the same place eventually, maybe. Like, that's
If
kind
you
of
make
what
the
I'm
right,
thinking.
if you make the right choices.
Right? He chose poorly.
Chose poorly.
Is that a
Indiana Jones.
Indiana Jones
Yeah.
reference? Okay.
But I
so-
mean, that's interesting too, because it kind of ties into like the questions at the top of the show, where it's like, was there, like, are these new discoveries and like a manifestation of that idea, right?
Exactly,
Like, are
a
they like the
physical
real,
representation.
yeah, which is cool, because it's like, is it just a model, or was there something more, functional to it? Like, so.
Exactly. So there's so much ambiguity when you're like, even with the chambers like that we're going to be discussing, the catacombs initially, because we came across this thing called the Tomb of the Birds.
Yes.
And this has been loosely connected to this idea of an underworld possibly existing in the physical world.
Right.
So, yeah, anyways, like, I'm still trying to wrap my whole head around this, because it's just,
I mean, that's the problem. Well, problem. It's a good problem to have when we look into Egypt-related topics, that, like, the rabbit holes are infinite. I mean, with all these topics they are, but Egypt especially, because there's so much information, there's a lot of misinformation.
oh yeah, a lot of pseudoscience.
Like, more so than other sort of genres
because
of
it is a very
archaeology.
stimulating topic. Like,
Right.
there's a lot of people with their own ideas.
Yeah.
Which we've come across in a lot of different videos.
Indeed, we have, and we have.
But we don't want to there. So we just wanted to reiterate that, yeah, like, this is a very significant aspect of Egyptian mythology. Obviously, a lot of people think that these great pyramids, like the whole Giza plateau, was like they were tombs for the kings.
Yep.
Other people have different ideas about what they could possibly have been used for.
Right.
Things like, what was that, the agricultural one? And
Well, I mean, there's some
all sorts
crazy
of-
theories about,
yeah.
obviously, like, the main pyramid being used to generate electricity.
Oh,
like, how
right,
there was some people that speculate that they were pumping water into it and basically
Right.
using it as some sort of a battery. Like, obviously, some of the pyramids are tombs, right? Like, there's tombs that have been
Well,
uncovered.
some people think that they were almost staged to be tombs.
That's
too.
another aspect. That's another theory. Like, we'll get into that.
Sorry.
I mean, but in terms of the main one, in terms of Khufu, in terms of the largest pyramid at Giza, that is not conclusive that it was the tomb of the king of Khufu or whatever. So people don't actually know exactly what that pyramid was constructed for.
Very cool. We're going to
Which
dive
is
into
cool.
that
Yeah.
later on in this episode. Let's stick to the Tomb of the Birds.
Yes.
So the Tomb of the Birds it has a history. It started off, it was basically uncovered in the 1800s initially. And it is actually located to the west. It's kind of like a northwest from the tip of the second pyramid. So if
Okay.
you're looking at like a map and you have north to north, like, north to north.
North to north.
So you're looking at it, and then, yeah, like, so you go to the second pyramid, and it's like this, I can't remember, I think he said it was about
I mean, we'll have this online.
700 meters away
Yes.
from the pyramid.
Yeah.
500 to 700 meters. I don't have that exactly in front of me, but yeah, so this guy, Andrew Collins, we came across.
Right.
Maybe we should give a little disclaimer before
Yeah,
we really dive into that.
so we are going to reference this guy, Andrew Collins, who is a controversial figure in Egyptology, archaeology, and just paranormal studies in general.
Kind of blurs that line between pseudo-archaeology
Yeah,
and,
like, he's definitely...
or ancient alien type, whatever.
Yes,
Like,
so he's sort of linked to the ancient alien camp of archaeology and things like that. But at the same time, he plugs a lot of ideas that aren't the ancient alien sort of angle. He has some interesting ideas in archaeology, and especially in Egypt, but just a disclaimer that, we don't want to lean too heavily on it, because it's more just interesting food for thought.
and he did detail the history as well.
Yeah, and I mean, he's been there. Like, he's done expeditions and legitimate things, and, quite frankly, like, Amber and I, like, we kind of occupy a space between, pseudo-archaeology, pseudo-history, pseudo-this and that, and searching for real evidence, because...
Well, we dig through it all the time.
Well, of course,
and,
yeah. It's just
So
like...
you just have to have
I think it's important to have people like this, because... They push the boundaries, and yeah, it ticks off the conventional conservative archaeologists and stuff. But anyway, we will be referencing Andrew Collins, so you can look him up. But Yeah, just a brief disclaimer there.
Yes. So basically, Collins, he's explored this, what is called the Catacombs, that extend from the northwest corner of this plateau, the Giza Plateau.
Yeah.
And, sorry, excuse me.
You're excused.
Got coffee burps.
Oh God, great.
So anyways, why did I just pull out my Cartman?
I don't know.
I don't know.
Okay.
Anyways, so he was discussing how this Henry Salt figure was one of the first people. He was a British Egyptologist, and he was working in the 1800s, and he was the British consul general of Egypt.
Okay.
And he was buddies with a guy named Nigel Skinner Simpson, who, again, was in the Egyptology realm.
Okay.
So this guy, Nigel Skinner, he had been examining... Sorry, I had this mixed up. Henry Salt and Cavaliga, they were the two that were working together.
Okay.
And Egyptologist Nigel Skinner was actually examining his memoirs and kind of uncovered this mention of these caves that they discovered in 1817, I believe. So, yeah, Salt and Caviglia had entered a network of catacombs, and they actually... they explored them for about several hundred yards, and they apparently came across 3 large chambers of equal size that were interconnected, and there was further tunnels leading away in the darkness. So 1817, very curious.
Yes, indeed.
So this is the tip of the mystery for the Tomb of the Birds.
Yeah.
And the reason we're referring to it as the Tomb of the Birds, we didn't really mention this, but essentially why it's called that is there were mummies of birds found in it.
Yeah.
And kind of has to do with maybe perhaps they were sacrificial offerings to Osiris.
Could have been. Mm-hmm. But obviously birds were worshipped. I mean, they mummified birds and cats and other animals too. They did crocodiles, they did all sorts of different animals for whatever reason because they matched up with different deities and stuff. Mm-hmm. The fact that it's 1817 for this first tidbit for the mystery is really fascinating because that's an era where, you know, the preceding archaeologists were blasting things like crazy, using dynamite to excavate and things like that, and whatever was found in 1817 could have potentially been lost or missed or is now underground. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's not accessible.
Exactly. Yeah.
Anyway, continue.
Sorry, yeah. And yeah, so they were actually disappointed because they were looking for obviously gold and treasures and all this stuff.
Of course.
And didn't really come across any of that. So they just, they returned to the surface and didn't actually go back. I guess they were like, whatever, just a bunch of dead birds down there. So that's that. Yeah. And essentially why... Like, okay, so we didn't actually we kind of jumped over that whole idea of, like, the underworld of Osiris actually containing this what's referred to as this unearthly light that is, like, it's like a treasure beyond all treasures, and it's held in this underworld and guarded by Osiris and this snake. I can't remember the name of the snake now, but it's, like, this... Yeah, so that's kind of the story, the underlying story of, like, so if you uncover this tomb, only the chosen one will be able to enter, and anyone else who does will essentially be squirted with fatal venom in their eyes, blinding them forever.
Right, okay.
And, and the only one, the chosen one, will be able to take, I can't remember what kind of gemstone it was, from... the eye of the snake or something, or on its forehead.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry,
right.
I'm totally butchering this.
No, it's okay.
Now.
It's, I mean, that's
I don't
very
have
much
my notes
just
in front
like
of me,
the hero's journey. Like, again,
well, exactly.
Right? It's sort of the same.
Yeah.
Very, very similar.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just tryring to find this name here because it was. Oh, here it is. Yeah.
Perfect.
Oh, okay. We're right on track here.
Great.
Okay, sorry. I thought I had my notes lost, but it was just kind of a little bit out of order.
That's okay. Story of our lives.
So anyway, continuing on this story.
Yeah.
So we get 20 years down the road, we're up to 1837. Supposedly, according to Andrew Collins, the only other explorers to actually dive into these catacombs was Colonel Howard Weiss, and he was an Egyptologist and a British MP.
Yep.
And he had a colleague, John Shea Perring, and they just chanced upon the entrance during some routine explorations, and they didn't even really record their findings because they were just...
Just to be clear, the reason they like it might sound strange to say like, oh, they just chanced upon an entrance, and like, yeah, you're digging, you're an archaeologist, like that's kind of what happens. You chance find stuff, right? But the reason, like, I kind of chuckled when I read that. It's like the reason they just chance found something is because they were using dynamite as their main tool for archaeology. They weren't dusting slowly in the cracks trying to see, oh, what's this little image of a bird etched in here? It's like, nope, stick some dynamite in there. Let's get through it. Yeah. Which is really sad. It's kind of like, well, how much history was lost just from the impatience of these. I
know, right?
These like the early stages of the royal. What was the British Royal Society, whatever, that Al-Masih ended up being a part of later in the 20s and stuff like that? The Royal Geographic Society?
Yes,
yeah. So this would be the early stages of what would end up being the Royal Geographic Society, right? In the early 1800s.
Yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And they were kind of heavy-handed in their archaeological methods, I'd say.
Very unfortunate.
Anyway.
But they did uncover it again, so that's where the story sort of picks up. But... before we get into any more, we are going to take a quick break for our friends at Double Density Podcast. So, we love these guys.
Yes.
And anyone who's a regular listener to our show will know that we did a recent collaboration. Yeah. And so, if you haven't actually listened to that one, I would highly recommend you do it. We did a cross-country tour of the paranormal in Canada.
Yeah, so one episode on our show and one on their show on Double Density. So Legends of the Great White North, you can check that out on our feed. Mm-hmm. And then the part 2 is over there on Double Density's feed. And Brian and Angelo are awesome. They talk tech and paranormal, so make sure you guys go check them out and give a listen to this promo.
From Apple products to Zelda games, and from aliens to zombies,
we are Double Density. Tech tales and paranormal primers with your hosts, Brian and Angelo.
New episodes every Wednesday. DoubleDensity.net.
Double Density.
All right, and we're back. And we would like to start off with more on Osiris, because that was kind of the missing piece of the mythology we just covered.
And is obviously one of the most well-known Egyptian deities, obviously, but
it's kind of interesting. Like, I kind of honestly sort of forgot who Osiris was. Like, that name is very familiar, right?
And you hear it all the time. I mean, it's like brands for things are called Osiris. True. Skateboard brand called Osiris. There's, but yeah, god of the underworld.
God of the underworld. And it's very interesting because in Egyptian creation myths and stuff, Osiris was actually originally the lord of the earth. And he was actually, one day, as it goes, like, this reminds me of Greek mythology, he was actually betrayed by his brother, and his brother killed him. And his wife Isis, I guess, tried to revive him, and they were unsuccessful, but they did revive him for a day, and then he went back down to the underworld. And so it's almost like it was like a metaphor having to do with the sun, like Ra, and like the cycles.
Okay.
And what else does that remind you of in Christian mythology?
Like the resurrection.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's paralleled in a lot of different mythologies and stuff. But in our case, so Osiris, the lord of the underworld. So he is kind of like the gatekeeper, and he kind of... the descriptions is basically that Osiris is a radiating light in darkness, and that he basically guards this treasure, a powerful object of an unearthly source. And it's like, what the heck does that mean? And then, of course, the snake I couldn't remember the name of it before the break, but... essentially Collins, when he was exploring this area, he actually came across an ancient Arab tomb guardian, and he didn't speak any English, but unfortunately he had a translator with him. And so the translator discussed how this tomb guardian was telling him of this legendary El Hanash, warning him that essentially anyone who enters will be squeezed to death by this massive serpent that guards the catacombs.
Crazy.
And is also capable of spitting deadly venom in the face of anyone who attempts to steal, the great diamond. That's what it was.
There you go.
The diamond
That
it
makes
protects.
sense.
Yes, but supposedly the legend tells that one day the chosen one will enter the cave and El Hanash will blind him in only one eye, allowing him to extract the gemstone, that's said to hold great powers. Like, I'm thinking, like, this must be like the Philosopher's Stone. If it's radiating an unearthly light, who knows?
That reminds me of things that we would come across in looking at alchemy stuff.
Yep.
Philosopher's Stone, absolutely. Yeah. The homunculus radiating red light.
Very mysterious.
We're always crossing back over to our old episodes, and as a matter of fact, I didn't mention it earlier, but Tomb of the Birds, like, does that sound familiar to anyone? Obviously, Zerzura.
Zerzurs.
So
Yeah.
I wonder if there's a possible connection here. We'll touch on that at the end.
Yeah, totally.
But obviously, Zerzura was supposed to be the city of the birds, right? This white city.
Exactly.
Where, doves are flying around. Mm-hmm. Anyway.
And it's interesting because the mummies of the birds that were found, some of them were quite large, like they were birds of prey. Like things like falcons, or not falcons, is a falcon?
Like hawks and eagles and things like that.
Things like that, yeah. Sure. And then, like, raptor type birds.
Yeah, like a falcon's a bird of prey.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, maybe it was, what was that legendary bird that we came across?
The auroch.
The auroch.
Yeah, except that thing was like
massive.
50 feet tall or something.
So maybe this was a temple celebrating the Thunderbird. We're getting silly now. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, okay. Let's get back on track.
So again, going back to Osiris, this possible real existence of an underworld, it makes sense because Egyptians, like we were kind of touching on earlier, they have this very intricate connection between the metaphorical and the physical.
Right.
The Ka, the Ba, they have all these different, interconnecting ideas of having to do with, just the cycles of life and rebirth and all this stuff. And so it's very cool because there's the mythology of the journey through the underworld, and then you do get possible physical representations in the pyramid and the tools, right? Because they leave all these tools and even the boats, right? The boats were meant to be used by the pharaoh in death to sort of traverse, I don't know, the lakes of fire.
So why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about that then? So there was legit boats inside.
There was, yes.
Which pyramid was that specifically? That was the largest?
there was tons. There's
a bunch of them.
There is one pyramid specifically that has a huge boat in it, and I can't remember. We touched on that briefly when we were looking into ancient Chinese explorers and if ancient cultures could possibly traverse the oceans.
Yeah, transoceanic.
Yeah, and so that was one that kind of came up. But anyways, getting back to the underworld.
Yes.
So funerary texts such as the Duat, which is the book of that which is in the underworld, suggests a physical representation in the vicinity of the Giza pyramids. In this particular text, this god, it's an earth god Sokar, which is a falcon-headed god of the dead, is depicted standing atop a multi-headed snake. And so this is connected to this Tomb of the Birds. And so, Andrew, he kind of, Andrew Collins, sorry, not you.
I was there.
You were there. Yeah. So there's loose connections to be made between these shrines that are found in the vicinity of this Tomb of the Birds.
Yeah.
And the actual mummies of birds and the gods that were supposedly like this falcon-headed god. Like, so there's all these loose connections that you can make to that.
Right.
And I don't know. There's like I said, we got to take this with a grain of salt because,
of course,
a lot of this has to do with Collins's personal interpretations of some of this stuff. So,
right. Well, and
it's not like we just looked at what he had to say.
No, not at all. We have, and as always, you guys can go look at our sources after the episode's posted. It takes a sec, but then we get them up on the website, so you can go look at the same stuff that we've looked
usually
at.
Usually a day or two after we release.
But I think it's important to just remember that, you got to take everything with a grain of salt. Even when you're reading something that's like from a peer-reviewed academic source, it's like, well, what university is it coming from? Like, who's writing about it? What did they write about it in the past? Like, there's always you have to think critically about everything that you're reading. But at the same time, it's like posing questions that are a different interpretation of an archaeological site or historical find. If it's not completely I mean, even the ones that are completely outlandish, they're fun. They stimulate conversation, right? But like I said earlier, I feel like we fall somewhere in the middle, and I think Collins does too with a lot of these ideas with the Underworld.
Yeah, and he's not just pulling this out of thin
No,
air.
exactly. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
I think that there's arguments to be made, and he makes them, that you can interpret things differently.
Yeah.
But people always just kind of go to the far end, being like, that's the ancient aliens kind of argument for things. Like, I'm just going to totally misinterpret this to benefit my argument.
Yeah.
Which anyone can do, because nobody really knows what a slab from 8,000 years ago means. But it's all speculation. That's what we're here for. Speculate.
Speculation. Yeah, so getting back to, so we're at the point where we're at Collins. Collins has kind of gone in. He actually did 2 different investigations. One was in 2007, the other was in 2008.
Yes.
And so he investigated the passage, so the mouth of the passage, and him and his wife, I guess, and I think there's one other person with them in their team, they explored several hundred meters down the one passage, and they got to a point where there was a split, but the air was getting too thin for them, and they couldn't actually continue on further until the following year. So that was the 2007 one. And so 2008, they go back. They actually go further down. And there's a map that we're going to have on the website. It's really cool. It's just like an overview of the different caves and passages. And these caves he describes as naturally forming caves.
Interesting.
And, yes, exactly. And they're formed from limestone. And they actually have this really interesting shape. Like the top half, like it's almost as if it was subjected to 2 different periods of water, because there's one aspect that shows that it would have been completely submerged, and it results in this specific shape. I think it was a keyhole shape type of cave.
Okay.
And then there's also evidence of just water, not it wouldn't have been submerged at this point. It would have just been dripping water that would have further sort of eroded away the limestone.
Sure.
Which actually makes sense when you think about it, because there is evidence that the Sphinx even was subjected to 2 periods of flooding, right? There's 2 levels of water.
Yeah.
So anyways, just that's another reference. But
Well, that's a part of the complex, so that's a good reference to make, right?
So he kind of thinks that, these are naturally forming, like, ancient cave systems that were utilized by the Egyptians. And there's actually ancient references. There was a Greco-Roman historian, Ammianus Marcellinus, sorry.
Nice job.
And he was...
That's one of your better pronunciations, I'd say.
Yeah, that was great. But he was around in about 360 AD, and he actually wrote of these subterranean fissures and winding passages that he called syringes underneath the sands of Giza. And so the question then becomes, Andrew Collins reached a point where he came across a circular tube that descended vertically down. It was like a shaft.
Yeah.
And he was unable to follow it down for whatever reason. Didn't have the equipment or whatever.
Well, I wouldn't want to get lowered into that necessarily.
It's like,
just
it
get
reminds
lowered
me of
into the
Polska.
underworld.
It's like
yeah,
a gate to hell.
Well, actually, that was one of my notes at the top. It's like, are we dealing with an Egyptian, almost sort of like an Egyptian castle host?
Right, because it is the underworld. Like you could it's their conception of.
Yeah. Did they find
afterlife.
that spot in the earth where they've, like, just like Castle Hoska,
Totally.
maybe, where they've found a connection somehow?
So it's very interesting to think that perhaps these syringes or these fissures and winding passageways possibly could go like hundreds and hundreds of meters below the surface and potentially extend quite a far distance, perhaps underneath the entire plateau. It could even lead to, like, if we uncovered more passages, like, I don't know. I'm totally, like, my brain is going a mile a minute thinking,
I know.
These could connect all the pyramids. There could be some crazy, like, like maybe this physical realm actually inspired the original mythology from thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago.
Exactly. I feel like that's sort of that's the main thing that you and I are wanting to emphasize in this episode. It's the idea that there could have been an even more ancient history, a pre-Egyptian history that the Egyptians, took knowledge from, or learned from, or performed their own archaeological explorations and, rediscovered these things and then utilized them or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's so cool because, so there was the reference from the ancient Greco-Roman historian. There was also Arabic travelers that recorded similar tales following contact with Coptic Christians in the early, in the AD years. Again.
Interesting.
Early AD years. in the few centuries after
after the death of Christ, which would have been Coptic Christianity sort of came to be, I believe, 40 AD.
Coptic Christians, they kind of inherited the ancient Egyptian culture right after the fall of...
They did, but then they were obviously heavily persecuted.
Yeah.
And
that was one of our theories for Zazura.
Yeah, that...
Perhaps Zazurans were Coptic Christians that
had...
fleeing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
But anyways, yeah, so these Arabic travelers, yeah, so they were exposed to these stories as well, and they were told of, again, the existence of these underground passageways beneath the Great Pyramids, apparently created by a legendary king in an attempt to preserve knowledge of science and arts of his society. And many of these have to do with like disaster myths, tales of like an impending like flood or catastrophe from the heavens, that type of thing.
Okay.
So it was almost like their way to like I don't even, but that seems kind of dumb. If you're expecting a flood, why would you dig? Like, why would you go down? Wouldn't you want to go up?
Yeah.
So this was kind of the backdrop. All of these sort of legends and tales. This was kind of what inspired Salt and Caviglia and all these Egyptologists that were going in and trying to find all these riches.
Yeah. Well, and then same thing with Almasi and Zerzura. Same idea.
Exactly.
Based on truth, based in part in truth, and little pieces of evidence found leading people along the breadcrumb trail over the centuries. It started with Salt and Caviglia, and then obviously ending up with Andrew Collins, and it's too bad that some people have a certain view of him or whatever, but I do actually think a lot of his work is worthwhile for posing the question. But it's just there's so much left to be discovered there. One of the things that we've came across is the idea that maybe the Egyptian authorities already have looked at a lot of these things. Like maybe they have used lidar, because that would be the main thing. Be like, okay, well, how far does a tunnel run from the main pyramid? Do they connect to the other pyramids? Well, let's do an extensive lidar survey to see what's there. Well, but that costs a lot of money, and the Egyptian government doesn't just let Western researchers these days waltz in very easily. So,
well, would they use lidar, or would it be more like a sonar? Because lidar is more for penetrating loose particles.
Right, but I mean, if you're using an air lidar search of the area, maybe you'd be able to penetrate the sand and be able to see the outline of caves or tunnels or shafts beneath the sand, right?
True. And so actually, yeah, that's what we're going to get into with this whole, there was, I can't remember what it was called, the SAREC satellite, I believe. And this was from a German institute, a research institute, in conjunction with a Egyptian committee for, antiquities of whatever, I can't even remember the name of it. But okay. They were working in conjunction, and they actually did do some, not LiDAR, but it was basically, a survey from above through using a satellite, and they revealed it's very faint, and we're going to include these photos as well. It's these shadow lines that trace from this entranceway of the Tomb of the Birds, and they trace towards the northwest corner of the second pyramid, like I mentioned before.
Yeah, the second largest.
Sorry, it's the Terra SAREC satellite, radar satellite.
Okay. Okay.
Just to be clear there, but yeah, so that was what was used for this particular
survey
expedition. Yeah. Exactly. And I wonder if something like this would be useful in actually examining the pyramids themselves.
I wonder if anybody out there with an archaeology background or that knows anything about this, please reach out to us with your thoughts. Exactly.
So again, yeah. So Collins, he was definitely very involved with this sort of more recent, 2008 sort of, not excavations, but adventures into the area, I guess.
Adventures, I mean.
I don't know what else you'd call it. But originally he wasn't even there to sort of uncover this. He was actually there to trace this ground sky overlay of a particular constellation called Cygnus, or also known as the Northern Cross, I guess. But yeah. He was tracing how the placement of these three main pyramids correspond to three key stars of Cygnus. But there was one marker that was like missing or something, and then one of his colleagues suggested that it could be something called the Hall of Records, which was a name given to this underworld / tomb of birds by a guy, the American psychic Edward Case. He in the 1920s, yeah, this is totally random, but he deemed this the Hall of Records, which actually corresponds back to the ancient Arabic travelers' stories, where they were talking about how it would have been a place where knowledge was stored, and things like that. So again, yeah, this is so random, but Edgar Case, he predicted the existence of such a place in the 1920s, and he gave it the name the Hall of Records. And so, skipping forward now back to 2007, Andrew Collins visiting, trying to figure out this constellation, was just his colleague, I can't remember the name of the colleague, he just suggested, oh, maybe it's the Hall of Records. And he's like, what? And so he went to this, exactly the entrance of the Catacombs, the Tomb of the Birds.
Yeah.
And it did roughly correspond to his missing ground sky marker. So...
Interesting.
Yeah. So anyways, I don't know if that's like... Because, again, I'm not sure how exact his calculations are, if he is even qualified to really be making those calculations. But
probably not, but
probably not. But
that's
he
okay.
did kind of... He's a go-getter, man. He's, you know...
I'd say so.
Yeah. So he descended on the same chamber that Salt apparently was uncovering in 1817. And he didn't even reach, he doesn't think he reached as far as Salt did, actually, because he never came across those 3 chambers that Salt had described.
Right.
But they did come across some very dangerous white widow spiders, which were very...
White widow spiders?
Isn't that interesting? Yeah, apparently they... So that, again, kind of corresponds to the warnings made by that old ancient guardian of the tombs.
Right, yeah.
Where he was like, if you go down there, you're going to die.
Right. How are spiders surviving down there? Too. I guess there's bugs and things.
Yeah, I guess.
There must be.
Well, there's bugs. There was carcasses of camels and animals that he thought maybe hyenas had dragged in. Yeah, exactly. Things like that. So no snake skins, though, I don't think.
Huh.
I wonder. He didn't mention
You'd think that would be a perfect place for snakes.
Exactly. So, again, he started to get roped into this mystery, this adventure, and he started looking into the research being performed by this German aerospace center, the institute I mentioned before, that was operated jointly with this Astrium Association as well. So they were the ones using this Terra-SARX satellite to sort of uncover. And this satellite has the ability to sort of detect natural faults in the rock. So this is what kind of, again, corresponds to this natural formation of the limestone caves. And yeah, and just, and potentially that was tapped into by ancient Egyptians and maybe...
So a blend of the natural caves and the man-made tunnels.
Exactly.
They continued on to... And we've seen that, you know, you can find that all over the world, right? Where humans have taken natural formations in the earth and kind of reworked them into whatever they needed to be, right? Whether it be a shelter or whatever. I think that that's just absolutely fascinating, obviously. It's the idea that not only could there be a more extensive network that was built possibly pre-4500 BC, which is where what most Egyptologists set as the sort of the earliest dynasties that would have built the complex, the Giza complex. I mean, they would have had to have some serious engineering skills to pull it off, to be tunneling underground and reworking caves and things.
What about the air? What about oxygen and all that stuff? Like, you know,
that's another. I mean, did they figure out some way of like pumping fresh oxygen underground?
Or maybe there's yet to be discovered like ventilation shafts or something. I wonder. Possibly. This is a cool quote from this is from Collins's website here, but just discussing the findings of the satellite. He says here, this quote: "The shadow line on the Terra-SARX radar satellite image seems to connect with another wider shadow line that starts at a position corresponding to a gully in the plateau's northern cliff just west of the Tomb of the Birds and curves towards the second pyramid, where it is finally lost from sight on the north side of the monument's square base. Once again, there are no visible features on the corresponding Google satellite map to explain this anomaly." So, I don't know. I thought that was really interesting because maybe that, again, that points to maybe there is even more that we just have yet to sort of uncover.
Yeah. Well, there's so much. I mean, this
So
reminds me
much.
of Olaf Copper or whatever too, like referenced from the Zerzer episode, The
yeah.
Egyptologist,
Yeah.
where he said, like, I mean, he's researching a branch of Egyptology that's lesser known,
Mm-hmm.
but there's literally hectares upon hectares upon hectares of dug terrain, right? Like that has not
Unexcavated,
been
yeah.
unexcavated, right?
yeah.
That has not been looked at by
And
archaeologists.
just so many different ways to interpret it as well. So Collins, after examining this data provided by the satellites, he does believe that the beginnings of these shadow lines mark, or the fainter shadow line, not the wider one, marks the spot where Salt discovered the mummified birds and all this stuff. And yeah, I don't know. Like it's very curious because we don't have a lot of answers as to what purpose this would have served. If this is potentially, I don't even, like, I'm at a loss because I just want, why can't they send a freaking little robot down into that little vertical shaft and just see? Because they are doing that inside the pyramids themselves. And we're going to get into that in a second because that's super interesting.
Yeah.
But it's just this very curious entranceway that potentially served a very important purpose.
That we just don't.
And is potentially much more ancient than the pyramids themselves. And
would be the reason why they were built there.
Perhaps.
Right? Possibly. Mm-hmm. Besides the fact that it's obviously in an ideal sort of area close to the delta or whatever, right?
And another thing that that kind of like corresponds again to this, connecting this tomb of birds with the underworld, is the idea that, okay, so again, this is from Colin, so I just want to like just,
You have to disclaimer,
disclaim that. But anyways, he says here, he says, is it possible that the bird cult once associated with this site honored Hermes, a Greco-Egyptian form of the Egyptian god Thoth, spelled Thoth, the keeper of ancient records and guardian of ancient wisdom? If correct, then future excavations inside the tomb and caves might well reveal that the mummy birds purportedly left there were ritual offerings and contained the remains of ibises, which is a bird sacred to Thoth / Hermes. If the birds found here were not ibises, but raptors, such as hawks and falcons, then the cult here was probably that of Sokar, the guardian of the Duat of Memphis, or Rasto, the ancient name for Giza. Either solution will go some way to prove that the Tomb of the Birds was seen as an entrance into a cave underworld. End quote.
Interesting.
So, again, so this is connecting the birds, connecting them. That's very curious, right? If this is the Temple of Thoth, the keeper of ancient records. So what does that refer to? The Hall of Records? Like, all this stuff.
So there's these connections.
Loosely connecting.
Yeah. The other interesting thing about this quote that stands out to me is the guardian of the Duat of Memphis. So it's one specific entrance point. Mm-hmm. So it sort of like implies that, obviously this is just a quote from Collins, but it implies that, and this would make sense because there's so many pyramids and there's multiple possible underground caverns and things like this, that there's more than one entrance to the underworld. That makes sense that there's an underground network connecting these multiple
and
significant locations.
Exactly, in the different realms, and they're all interconnected. There's these loose separations and blurred boundaries and all these things.
Yeah.
And oh my gosh.
Yeah. So that would
really
be, so there'd be
excited
one at Memphis and you're just freaking kid in a candy store.
A little bit. I know.
Yeah.
It's just so fun and exciting to think about. Like, love it.
I know, right?
Okay. And again, he does go into depth with this stone tube, like the shaft that we discussed, that vertical shaft that kind of just disappeared into the darkness. So Collins speculated that this stone tube connects with with a further east-west oriented chamber just beyond the exit. So it could actually be connected to this second pyramid. It's kind of what he's suggesting. And if it is connected to the second pyramid, then what's to say that there isn't, again, like he said, there was that wider shadow line that traced. So I don't know, man. Maybe there's like a whole freaking bunch of stuff going on down there.
I know, right?
Well,
here's just another random thought too. that from a practical point of view, if the earliest Egyptians had sort of discovered like an even earlier people's work, or that they utilized these underground catacombs or whatever, like who's to say that one of the reasons why they created an underground network wasn't just for the simple purpose that like it's cool down there. Like it's we can get, we can move from shrine to shrine, significant location to significant location, or at least maybe important people can, or something that's not above ground like the rest of Egypt, like the rest of the peasantry or whatever, right?
Right.
I don't know. That's just like but then again, it's like, why don't you just travel at night or something? You know what I mean? Like, it's like there's lots of ways to avoid the heat.
Not as cool, man.
Anyway.
Not as cool. Well, especially because, like, yeah, like, the caves do appear to be of natural origin. The keyhole shape and the smooth walls all suggest this, like, natural erosion. And so maybe they're just utilizing what was already there.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And there is evidence, like we said already, to suggest that the entire plateau was at one point saturated underneath the water table. So that would really help with the formation of extensive cave networks.
And I quite honestly think we will eventually find them. If they're there to be found. It's obviously tough with the last decade with like Egyptian politics and stuff like that. It's not easy.
No.
And who's to say that it, like we said a minute ago, like Egyptian authorities haven't already done this, and just out of spite for the West, because Western explorers and archaeologists are always going in and it's their history.
Yeah.
So I can see why from like their Department of Antiquities would be very closed, shut off or whatever, right? But
especially if they're still in the interpretation part of it all. Like, what if they're not even sure what they've uncovered or something? And
exactly.
So I think maybe what we should do now is maybe cover a bit more of like just the pyramids themselves, because that's super interesting. And obviously, we've sort of alluded to the idea that perhaps all of these, like, cause there's 3 great pyramids, right? And the biggest one is Khufu's pyramid, and there's also several smaller pyramids that are like Queen's pyramids, that type of thing. So it's a very extensive.
It's a massive space, though. Even just for the Giza complex is huge.
It's huge, and I found a really cool from Wikicommons, this cool map of like an overground, like, so you can see everything. So we'll include that as well in on our website. But so very mysterious. There's still things we've uncovered.
Oh, you're so excited about it. You're just yelling.
The coffee hasn't kicked in.
Yeah, clearly.
Big stretch. Okay.
Yeah, no, but like I just said, like I think that if these exist, they will be uncovered because things are still being discovered to this day. So like one of the more recent discoveries at the Giza complex was in the main pyramid, and basically people are touting this. This was a National Geographic article, but their researchers were basically touting this as the most significant major inner structure discovered since the 1800s. So since the Henry Salt days that we were just discussing. Basically, National Geographic researchers discovered an additional chamber in adjacent to the king's chamber in the center of the pyramid.
Okay, yeah. So it was like a void, right?
A void.
Is kind of what was picked up on radar or whatever?
Yeah, like on I don't know.
Was it radar or
they
sonar
used they used a few different methods, I think.
Oh, okay. So essentially, what like from like the images that I was looking at, it's parallel to the Grand Gallery, which is a diagonal chamber that leads up to the king's room.
Yeah. And just to give some perspective on the size, like it's the gallery is large. It's roughly 153 feet long and 26 feet tall.
Wow.
Like that, those are its dimensions.
That's
so
crazy.
It's a massive.
It's like a stairwell, essentially. Like
it's kind of on an angle.
Looks like you're going up
the
the staircase to heaven.
That's one way to interpret it.
Right?
But what's interesting about this is so this additional chamber was discovered, but there's no access to it. And it's inconclusive how it would have been closed off, and nobody knows what's in it.
Yes, and I actually came across some videos and some possible theories having to do with that as well. And so again, there was a diagram of the rough location of this void, which was parallel to the Grand Gallery. Yeah. And then also what was suggested, because, we didn't even know until the 800s AD, that the queen, like the upper chambers existed. We thought that it just descended downward, we as in
like
the world.
The British
exactly.
basically that
well,
were
not
there.
the British. The British weren't even freaking
Oh, sorry.
around.
What did you just say? What was the date you just
This would
gave?
have been like Greeks.
Oh, I thought you said.
and
Oh, I'm sorry.
Romans
You said
and all that.
1800s for some reason.
No,
Sorry.
not 1800s. 800s.
AD. Okay,
800s.
got you.
And what essentially happened was, it was kind of like a chance encounter or like expedition. Essentially, I can't remember the name of I think it was Alamon. Mammon, I think was his name, and he was an Arabic king, and he actually had an expedition go down into the pyramid, and he was the one that uncovered a crack in the ceiling of the descending passageway, and the crack actually was another block that they could remove, and it was like this, so anyways, it was like a super disguised entranceway, and so once they actually took the blocks, after they took the blocks away, they discovered the entrance to the Grand Gallery. And so that's how the Queen and King's chambers were discovered in 800 AD.
Crazy.
So until, we didn't even know that was around.
Right.
Okay, so what was hypothesized in the video was that section where the upper passage and the lower passage meet, there is a vertical shaft that would open up and give access to that supposed void that was recently discovered.
Yeah.
So there's so much left to be uncovered, really, in the upper echelons of the pyramids themselves, and that leads me to think that there's a lot left to be uncovered beneath the surface of the Giza Plateau. I'm thinking perhaps this site was chosen to build the pyramids on because of things that were already existing there.
Yeah, so I think that's kind of the crux of the interest, like this episode for me, the idea that yes, there could have been, and lots of people do speculate on this, that the pyramids, the largest ones and the oldest ones are far, far older than the 4,000 years or 4,500 years range that Egyptologists kind of give them, and that it could possibly be as old as 10,000 BC. So, and we touched on this in the Siberia episode with evidence found in caves there and things like that. And there are other bits of evidence around the world too that would suggest this. You know, if there was a civilization that predated the Egyptians, then yeah, if this was a significant spot to them, then of course they would have chosen that area to either reconstruct existing structures that were there, that were pyramids that were there already, or built it over top of underground caves that had been utilized by a previous civilization.
It makes sense in my mind to think that perhaps if this existing network of catacombs was there and conceived of in mythology as the underworld, then it only makes sense that if, say, because like in Egyptian mythology there's this idea of the journey so that the pharaoh will join the heavenly constellations of eternity, right, in the sky.
Yeah,
they were very heavily focused on astrology.
Yeah.
Astronomy.
Well,
astronomy, not astrology. I guess astrology too.
Both.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I was thinking that for a second.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And yeah, so it makes sense to me that they would build these massive structures that would connect the underground to the heavenly realm, or whatever you want to,
or vice versa, or whatever order. Yeah.
Well, exactly. So I think that is incredibly interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
To think
in terms of evidence for there being like an earlier peoples that, because here's the thing. Okay, here we are, 2018. You know, archaeologists in Egyptologists that are looking for evidence for things. It's hard to find. It's hard to come by, right? And you might find a artifact that then can be interpreted in a million different ways because it's so old and the context is gone, and we're trying to piece together the puzzle. Well, if we're struggling that much to find and piece together the puzzle of the Egyptians that, you know, the mainstream archaeologists say 4,500 years ago, then how are we supposed to find the evidence for a civilization that predated them, that influenced them? Yeah. Like, nothing is going to be left from that.
You would think,
right?
Yeah.
They would have had archaeologists. They might have not been called that, but they certainly would have had people working for the king, the emperors, the pharaohs, like in ancient Egypt, ancient China, all these places, and they were, you know, looking for stuff just like we are today, and then reusing it. That's my theory. That's what I think that.
But you're not saying that it was aliens.
No, I'm not saying it was aliens. I'm saying
more
that,
ancient cultures.
I'm saying that there was more advanced peoples further back than we give humans credit
So
for.
who could these ancient peoples have been?
Right.
Kind of becomes the question.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah. Good question. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, we've got, okay, so, I mean, the evidence that we had from the Siberia episode was the Denisovan skeletons that were basically found in a cave, and they were discovered in the same sort of proximity to tools and artifacts that dated back to like 40 to 70,000 years that were clearly Bronze Age. Like they were created with like what would be later
jewelry.
Bronze Age technology, right?
Uh-huh.
It wasn't supposed to exist. It wasn't supposed to be dated to this time. It wasn't, the skills weren't supposed to be there until the Neolithic period, around 8,000. So this was like the Berbers, like in North Africa, that had this technology, right? But if this was a possibility much earlier on, this was of course in a Siberian cave, but who's to say that? But that's those same people would have had to come from North Africa. Those same early branches of like the genus of Homo.
Early migrational patterns, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So who's to say that these early peoples, with evidence that they had technology to, manipulate an underground cavern, say, to use it for a shrine or for religious ceremony or whatever.
And that definitely gets into the whole controversy surrounding the advent of these different ages and different technologies, and how perhaps some people argue that Egyptians had access to Iron Age tools that would have come through trade with Turkey. And there was this Mediterranean route where they would have gotten, I can't remember where the timber was from, but that was from a different area along the trade route.
Yeah.
I think it was in North Africa maybe. And then, they apparently through trade, they might have been able to access iron tools, which, again, like we've seen lots of people discussing how you can actually carve granite.
Light granite,
exactly.
like those hard basalt.
Yeah.
Those hard rocks.
You need Iron Age tools to do that.
You can't use Bronze Age tools.
And the Egyptians supposedly only had Bronze Age tools.
Right.
And it's just, there's a lot to sort of pick apart with that as well.
Definitely. There's another interesting thing I found. Actually, I don't know if I added it in here. But there was a few articles, one from the Smithsonian and a few others as well, basically talking about how there's proof now that the Egyptians were harvesting metals from meteorites and using them for tools.
Cool.
And jewelry and things like that.
What type of metals?
So, metals that were harder than the Bronze Age ones. Like,
would it have been? It would have been iron.
It could have been, absolutely, iron.
Hunks of iron.
I'm trying to. We need my grandpa.
I had the idea too. I was like, wait a second, why couldn't they have used like diamond tip drills or something?
Here you had the story of the
chisels?
Diamond in the the Duat, the crossing. Yeah.
El Hanash.
Could they have figured that out and used some sort of diamond tipped drill?
Because there was some suggestions that there's evidence of high-speed drilling found.
Yes. So this falls into the camp of sort of pseudo-archaeology, although there are engineers out there and archaeologists that have basically said, there's markings on some of these, some limestone, some stuff that's, would have actually needed a drill or a saw because it was harder basalt or granite or whatever, but they show markings that aren't natural, that show something that's more of a high-speed instrument.
Interesting.
And
I wonder how they're able to determine that.
I tried to look into it, and it's basically just the striations. It's just the shape of the cut marks, and their closeness to each other would indicate a machine and more rapid movement than an individual with a hammer doing, because it wouldn't be so precise. It would be slight variations in the angle of the strike, right? But if you're using a drill or a saw, it's one cyclical motion, or it's one solid motion, right? It's not the variations of a human hand. You can't be exactly the same every single time. You know what I mean?
That's curious. Well, yeah.
It's bizarre.
It is interesting. Well, I was watching some videos on how they would have actually quarried these blocks out, and how granite is actually it does cleave along planes of 90-degree angles, so it is very easy to get a very precise, clean break in the rock.
Right.
That wouldn't need much finishing afterwards.
Right.
But I don't know, like, how much... Because, like, it's so interesting how ancient methods of quarrying stone are actually basically being used today.
Yeah.
We just have the convenience of electricity and using
jackhammers and
as
stuff like
opposed
that.
to just hammering one by one these, like, huge, like, stakes and using, like,
Sure.
metal wedges and things to kind of cleave into the rock.
I don't think there's anything that, like, paranormal to suggest that, like, ancient peoples could have figured out some way of powering something. To, like, if we're using the same
water
technology to...
technology.
Because here's the thing. The ancient alien argument takes away all of the intelligence of ancient peoples, right?
Mm-hmm.
It says, oh, you were given the technology. What we're saying is that, like, my theory
We're
is
giving
like,
them agency.
that
We're
I
saying
like. I feel like
totally...
there easily could have been people that figured this stuff out. I mean, even like in the episode with Mad Scientist with Chris and Marie.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he was saying like definitively that Ed built Coral Castle, Rock Gate.
And definitively
Because-
the Egyptians built the pyramids.
Yeah. Well, okay, great, but that's still insane. So, I think they could have had some more secrets behind it that
Some more
wasn't
technology.
mystical or anything necessarily, but just like really smart and just kind of figured it out. Yeah.
Very curious.
But the guys who were looking into this, just to, it was Stephen Meller and Christopher Dunn, who are archaeologists and went to Egypt in April 2013 to take a look at these supposed drill and saw markings at the Giza Plateau. Yeah, inconclusive, but they did find things that were interesting. So, like, there's these large niches. I want to say niche, like Friedrich Nietzsche. On the outsides and insides of the pyramids. Like when you're going up the pyramids from the outside, it's massive. It's like you're climbing a mountain. But there's basically these little sort of alcoves, like in between the placements of the largest blocks as you go up, and you can go into them. And inside these like crevices and stuff like that, there's just like there's cut marks, I guess, that don't seem
They're not like
they're-
just like a...
they seem out of place. And then on the inside of the pyramid, they mention these things like these large granite boxes that were carved out of one solid piece. And the lid itself is also made out of the box. The inside of the box is hollowed out, and it's just precise and pristine. You know, if they were using Bronze Age tools, it'd be
And
pretty
that-
tough to
Again, Kate, this
hollow
does...
out hollow out basalt or granite or any of these things.
Right, yeah, and even going back to just like back to the tomb, the underworld tomb, supposedly, like the vertical shaft that was discovered by Andrew Collins, and how that was like a precise circle.
Yeah,
That would
yeah.
need, like, you know, like how...
Well, that's just it. You're talking about, yeah, like how you can't do that from the 90-degree angle chiseling. Like, okay, great, I get that. You can get a
Yeah.
90-degree angle in granite.
The only thing I can think of that might explain that is that particular round circle is actually, well, he said there it's all limestone though, but I'm thinking in my head, what if that one particular piece was granite and the limestone's in the middle, and so the limestone was the stuff that dissolved,
right,
and
like
then the granite was
yeah.
left.
So like there's a section of that
Yeah.
stone with a limestone.
And that is actually seen in ocean stones as well. Remember, we
Right.
came across that again in the
Yeah.
ancient Chinese explorers, where there were these stones that they would use. They carved themselves that have perfect circles they would use for anchors for their ships.
Okay.
And how that's actually replicated in nature as well because of erosional patterns of
Right.
different
Yeah, because-
hardness of rock materials.
Right. So, but people were taking those anchors and saying, "Look, these people were drilling holes in rocks from
And so
10,000 years
evidence
ago."
that the ancient Chinese were on the shores of North America far before Columbus, but at the same time that is, again, because there is the natural versus the man-made.
Right. So it's sort of
So just another precedent, though. It's like, so maybe perhaps this one particular hole could be natural, but maybe not.
right. But I mean, the fact that these natural occurrences can happen, it like lends to the idea that there's a vast underworld network, because you know, when the plateau was covered in water, if there's a lot of limestone, and you just described a situation where it can be like a harder granite or whatever with a limestone in the middle, then there could be natural caves and tunnels like we've talked about, but that are way more expansive than you could even imagine. And then that had been obviously built up and utilized as the Underworld network. I think that there could actually be a connection to Zerzura from the complex, from the Tomb of the Birds. That there was actually something to do with maybe an escape route or a special royal passageway to an oasis that was only for certain people.
Very curious.
Anyway,
I honestly think we're going to be revisiting this one or similar themes in the future because there's so much, but we don't want to get too crazy for today.
Yeah.
I want to leave some tidbits for maybe our listeners to pick up on, and definitely please reach out to us with any of your theories, or if you have any additional information that you think is relevant to this.
Absolutely.
We would love to hear it.
Yeah.
Yes, we're totally open. We had an awesome reach out last week, right, with our Great Lakes Triangle series.
Yeah.
We had a pilot reach out to us and gave us a whole schwack of new theories and ideas to talk about.
Super fun.
We got some, the bonus material, and that was really, really cool.
Yeah.
So that's what it's all about, and that's why we would love to just, we like to be a little out there and just be like, we're just gonna, toss it out and see what you guys
Why
make
not?
of it. Why not, right?
That's what makes it fun.
Right. So, I guess in conclusion, you're kind of giving you're connecting it to Zerzura, hey?
Yes, I am.
I'm just totally again, I feel like a kid in a candy shop just thinking about all the possibilities of what could be down there. And I'm picturing almost like, what was that, The Secret World of Og or Oz? You remember that? The Secret World of Oz, when you read that book in elementary school?
Yeah.
It was like this whole underground society.
Yeah.
What if it's the mole people down there?
The mole people.
Oh my goodness. I'm not saying it's Hollow Earth, but I'm saying this could be something huge. Or it could be just, what if it's just, again, just the basis. It's a physical basis for the mythical representations of
Which
the
is just
underworld.
as fast, well, not just as fascinating. If there's a real literal underworld like a Castle Hoska gateway to hell, then that is fascinating. But definitely, if it is just a purely archaeological expedition left to be had, that is so cool. Imagine if we could find just how far this network goes and what it could be attached to. Maybe we could find another underground temple out in the Sahara that this is connected to, right?
So many possibilities.
We like to speculate, but it's fun.
Yeah. So, I think that wraps her up, eh?
Yeah.
For now.
Yeah.
We did have, again, we did want to give some special thanks to Chris for providing us with, again, all those ideas to work through for our bonus episode.
Yeah.
And as well, Adam C., we did get your comment, but it was too late. It was after we recorded, so thank you for your contributions as well. That was a really cool idea. Would have been sweet to include, because he was talking specifically about the ships. And how they could have been sucked down into these, crazy, abysses formed by perhaps these deep
underground
crevices.
Yeah, like underground volcanoes or gas bubbles being formed and taking them out. But anyway, thank you so much for reaching out with that.
We really appreciate that. And seriously, if you guys want to become part of the conversation, just join our Facebook group. That's the best forum. It's the best way to kind of reach out to all of you.
Totally.
And we would love it. But feel free also, if you don't want a social platform, just get us on a direct message on any of our social medias. Our Instagram is a great place for that. Twitter, we are always on Twitter.
Yep.
And Facebook as well. You can always message
Totally.
us
And then into the portal, mailbox@gmail.com is just the most formal, easy if you want to just shoot any questions or any comments, anything. So shoot us a message, drop us a line.
Yeah. This week as well, we had an awesome review from Berserker Guy on iTunes. He's like, tell your history prof to shove it. Step aside for these awesome people. So we really loved that review.
Thanks,
that was
man.
really fun.
Yeah.
So thank you. As well, look forward to a blog post coming up on all this crazy stuff this week. And we'll have our resources page updated for you lovely people as well.
Yes, indeed.
Anything else you want to include?
No, I think that's everything. Just thanks again for the review and for just, the engagement. And if you guys haven't had a chance yet and you like the show, please leave us a review. It really helps us out on iTunes. We're trying our best to get onto that front page.
Oh, man.
But just thanks for listening. And, we appreciate it.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, and thanks again for listening.
Mm-hmm.
And
until next time.
Until next week.
Mm-hmm.
This was a podcast from the Podfix Network. You can check out more shows like it at podfixnetwork.com.